We are on the air. Very good. It's 1 o'clock, so we will begin the Tax Exempt Review Committee meeting. We have 4 items on the agenda. Number 1 is to approve the Tax Exempt Review Committee meeting minutes of 6/22/21. If you've had a chance to review them and if we have any changes or corrections, now's the time. Otherwise, we will accept a motion.
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Number 2, 2021 Tax Exempt Review Committee Policy Cleanup. Jim.
Thank you. I sent out with the agenda a kind of cleaned up version of the proposed property tax exemption policies. What I want to do today is go through a kind of a summary of the changes. Some of these you've addressed already, so I won't spend a lot of time on them. I'll try to focus on the more substantive changes. When you look at the format, it still needs a little bit of cleaning up. Some of the policies are broken up into 3 different sections, and so I'll work with our administration offices to kind of get those in a little bit better order, and you'll kind of see them in this presentation. These are the summary of the changes I've going through. The overall format of the policies, really it's a series of 8 policies that deal with different types of applications that are designed to meet different city goals and objectives. So they are primary sector economic development that create jobs, and so we've got a list of policies and criteria for that. We've got the remodeling tax exemption. We've got the new housing tax exemption, the 2-year exemption for new housing. We have, this is sort of a new one, or an expanded one, is the core neighborhood housing. Right now, the policy deals strictly with the university mixed-use zoning, and with the core neighborhood plan, this policy would allow for applications maybe near the downtown or elsewhere in the core neighborhoods where redevelopment was proposed for multifamily housing. The tax increment financing policy, this is one now that is focused almost pretty exclusively on brownfield type conditions, rather than, so these are when developers might come in and ask for assistance, such as Bruhala, where there's some difficulty in doing the development, and this has the policies on that. There's the downtown housing, which is the payment in lieu of taxes for downtown housing. There's the lower income housing, and you'll see 2 applications today for this one. It's lower income housing, both for elderly. And then finally, a policy that needs a little bit more work is the public-private partnerships. And here there's probably less criteria. It's more of the outlining the process where the city wants to get into a public-private partnership. And examples in the past have been the horse park, where we send the utilities out there, an industrial park, and then several projects downtown where we've built parking garages that were done in conjunction with private sector development. So I'll kind of go through the proposed changes, or really how it's different than the previous policy. Under primary sector economic development, the policy now more clearly states that we're only assisting primary sector businesses. In the past, it said we will primarily do that, or generally do that. This is really focused on only primary sector businesses that would receive these types of incentives for job creation. The criteria has changed in several ways. We look at both year 1 jobs, how many they have that first year, but then also kind of 3 years out, because most businesses don't fully staff up in that first year. So we'll look at both that first year job creation as well as 3 years out. We've added a criteria that will look at the company's safety record. This was suggested by a couple of our commissioners. We've adjusted some criteria. Excuse me. We've adjusted some criteria on the building value. We make it clear now the approval must precede the start of construction or signing a lease. We've generally followed this in the past, but this is clear in the policy now. We've added some factors for when we will consider property tax exemptions beyond 5 years. There really wasn't any real criteria or guidelines before, and now we have that deals when there's substantial capital investment or real high-paying jobs or large numbers of jobs. We would look at going beyond the 5 year. We've rarely gone beyond 10 years. And then the review and reporting policy, that hasn't changed that much, but I think I'm going to work with the city attorney to develop kind of a form or an agreement, really to kind of expand the one we have now. We've been doing research, and we do find that there are a lot of agreements in place, and so we're trying to line up which companies signed the agreements and which didn't, and catch up on that. Any questions or thoughts on these policies? I know we've kind of gone over most of these before, but.
Yeah, I had a question with regard to the safety experience rating. If you say below city determined standard, average, and better than average, could we be a little bit more specific? I mean, most of these would be construction projects, I'm assuming, so wouldn't we want to use some sort of a construction index? Or what type of indices are you going to use to make that determination?
Yeah, we need to, that's one of the details we need to put in there, as well as the total number of points required. I think there's two things we would look at. You mentioned contractor's experience. So if someone's building a building, does that contractor have a good safety record or don't they? In some cases, they don't really know who the contractor is going to be yet. They haven't bid it out, and so that might be a little problematic. The other is, with manufacturing companies, some of them have they've been around a while, they have an established safety record. If it's a startup, there's nothing really to go on, and so I'm going to talk to our safety coordinator and try to get some ideas and bring those back to you. I want to have the final policy to you a month from now, and all these little details filled out, but within the overall policy, we may not put that criteria in there, and that might be something that we simply adjust each year outside of the policy.
So Jim, I think if it's okay with you, we'll just go through it again, but I think this is kind of the first time that we've gotten this back to us. And so I think, like you said, at the next meeting, if there's any specific changes that any of us want, if that's okay with you, we'll just kind of go through, and because there's like on page 7 where there was like the total number of points, you weren't really sure the number of points. And so I think a lot of that is, when you talked about safety, well, there's different, there's already safety ratings by companies that we can maybe go by that. And maybe the EDC has something that they use as well. So that's just something to think about. Do you know what I mean? It's not like we would have to reinvent the wheel.
The next one is remodeling exemption. We've spent a fair amount of time on this, and you've been supportive in the past of revising the policy so that everyone would qualify for that 5-year exemption, whether they were downtown or not downtown, whether they were housing or commercial, and regardless of the age of the building, provided it's over 25 years old. So this kind of broadens that type of exemption. But then we do note that the committee, you would be reviewing any building additions that would exceed the current value of the building. So if someone had a $200,000 building and they're putting a $300,000 addition on, you'd take a closer look at that one. It wouldn't just automatically go on the city commission agenda.
Can I ask you a question, Jim, about, so like the Renaissance Zone, they have when you're putting so much money into it, is there something that we can use from their policies for this, or is that kind of a separate way?
This is kind of separate because if you, if you have a $100,000 building and you remodel it and now it's worth $101,000, you only get the exemption on that $1,000 increment. So it's sort of self-governing that you only get as much as you put in.
Jim, when David referenced the question mark on the points, isn't that 100? Why do we keep having to come back with question mark?
We've kind of added the different categories, and so it's probably real easy to get to 100 right now. And what I wanted to do is work maybe with the city assessor score some of our previous applications, see how they generally come out, and then come up with a number. Maybe it should be 120 now because we've added more categories and more opportunities for points. But it's like your input on that. I'd like to have some real world examples too. I don't.
So Mike, can you do that by the next time? Because Dave's suggesting we want to prove it today, but wouldn't you guys be able to do that by next meeting? Okay.
Go ahead.
New residential housing. Is there a question? New residential housing, there's really no change proposed. I know one of our commissioners had suggested changes here, but it was a consensus of this committee to leave that the same, so I did. The core neighborhood housing would be that applications would no longer be limited to that university mixed-use zone. So there might be some, I think there's some areas just north of Sanford that might be appropriate for redevelopment. We continue to have it generally limited to a 10-year exemption. But one of the ideas in the core neighborhood plan was that we should also look at some affordable housing. And I think if we do that, we need to look at a longer-term exemption or they simply won't be feasible. So these would all have the but-for test, and so there's no kind of firm criteria. It's all kind of based on what you're going to need to make the project feasible. Any thoughts on that? Sure. Tax increment financing, again, these are more the developer requested ones. We've added into the policy that the sites must have brownfield type conditions. I've included definitions in the policy, kind of the brownfield definition from the Environmental Protection Agency and the blight and slum definitions from the North Dakota Century Code. So we have things that we point to on what's going to be required. So. And then the initial review of these would be by this committee and rather than the city commission. The P3 would start with city commission, larger ones, but these smaller ones could start with this committee rather than city commission. Downtown housing adds a statement that if there's affordable housing, that the exemption could be 100% up to 20 years, but that would be, again, dependent on a but-for test. So, and this is more market rate housing. We're primarily market rate housing. The lower income housing, this is an idea just bringing up today is whether or not we want to have this but-for test for these applications when they're applying for lower income housing tax credits. You have two of them before you today. They're already being reviewed by the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency to make sure they don't get more tax credits than they need. It's a rather thorough review. And so I think, our review is, not only redundant, but that everyone has come back, and obviously these are not feasible. They're never feasible if they have to pay all the property taxes. In addition, the applications are just not competitive because it's pretty well accepted that there needs to be city support for applications. These 8% or 9% credits are very competitive. Only about 50% of them get approved. If I could have Dan Madler talk about the review that his projects go under with North Dakota Housing Finance Agency. I think that would give us an understanding that there's a pretty thorough review of these. And so, again, I think if we're going to be competitive, we just need to recognize that their projects aren't feasible with the full property taxes.
So Dan, I guess that's the question. So right now, technically it says we're supposed to have a but-for test, but really that would be almost less stringent than what you have to go through. So if you could talk about that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim, and thanks to Commissioner Pepcorn. So thorough review, North Dakota Housing Finance Agency, all low-income housing tax credits is basically funneled through their agency. And what they utilize to underwrite the projects that come their way via applications is called basically a QAP, and Qualified Allocation Plan. So it's 24 pages of certain criteria based off of different information that they need and are targeting. And then also within that, there's a thorough financial review where they take a look at the development, the operating costs, and also evaluate the financial feasibility and underwriting that the projects will go through while they're being underwritten by investors and lenders to make sure they're financially viable. So what Jim mentioned is when they get to that point, they're thoroughly underwritten, reviewed, and they have a whole section on just the financial projections and performas and the sources and uses that go through that. And if you don't hit the mark, they will not move your application forward.
So Dan, can I ask you, would you have a problem with sharing that with us, let's say in the future for a project? Because basically then that would resolve that issue by able to say, well, we've gone through this process. Would you be willing to do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So to me, Jim, that's as long as we specify that and actually show this, I think that would answer the question actually more thoroughly than the other way.
Yeah, and the applicants have provided all their financial information, so we could, see that. And as always, I'm not an accountant, but trying to add $100 a month to each apartment unit and still keep them affordable just doesn't work.
Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, we'll just keep moving on. Bruce.
Jim, you and I talked about this, and I just wanted to bounce this off the committee. If you're okay with it, Jim mentioned about trying to maybe reorganize this policy a little bit, and the reason that I personally wanted to do that is because right on page 5, available incentive options that this committee reviews, we've got remodeling, residential new expanding business pilot, and TIF. And then as you read through, we jump right into primary sector, which really is tied to the pilot available incentive option. And then we get into a little bit of TIF, and then we jump back to some more stuff that's pilot, and then we conclude with something again that's TIF. So this might look a little different. I think it's all here. Thanks for doing this, Jim. But if everybody's okay with that, we thought we'd like to kind of reorganize it a little bit so that everything related to a TIF is follows the same section.
Okay.
If the group's okay with that. I won't waste the time if nobody wants to see it in that format. But
That's excellent. And I should call you Commissioner Grubb. I apologize for being so informal because I know we have to keep Robert's Rules of Order, so I apologize for that. And obviously, any positive improvements, that's what we're looking for, because that's kind of what we're, and this is, I would say, the initial draft once again. And so if there's any suggestions by anybody here or people watching, we're willing for constructive criticism, right, Jim?
Yeah.
And Lord knows we get a lot of that around here, so.
But the other factor, and maybe I'll jump ahead to it now, is really the name of the committee, the Tax-Exempt Review Committee, and should it really be the Economic Development Committee? I know the mayor has mentioned that to me. If you wanted a different name of your committee, I think Dave said if we change the name of the committee, you're probably double your pay.
I'll give you I know the mayor, he's got me as far as seniority and all that stuff, but to me, economic growth would be a good name, because economic development, since we already have an EDC, that would be a little bit redundant. But once again, if anybody has any suggestions, I think that'd be a good thing. But I think from the positive standpoint, I think that'd be good. Any other comments on that?
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest economic partnerships
The Economic Partnership
committee.
Excellent, John. See, we already have, anyway, if anybody else has any other good ones, we'd love to hear that, but I think this is a good time to do that too.
Move to approve. We don't want to take any more suggestions.
No, that's great, but I do think this is a time, we're making a lot of improvements and changes, and I think this is a good opportunity for do that too, so, thank you. And Jim, anything else?
Just finally, the public-private partnerships, these are examples we've done in the past. We've had the Fayland Industrial Park where we, tried to get an area developed by providing city infrastructure. There was Horse Park where we extended infrastructure. We've had downtown parking ramps and P3 developments. We've done 3 of those. We've done the riverfront development plan. It's really hard to have criteria on these because they're all so different. But anyway, the general policy would be that the plan would have to really be initiated by the Fargo City Commission. Sometimes a partnership with another, the private developer. that the plan would include public facilities, public activities, incentives that are essential for the development, and that the development would not otherwise occur without, the public-private partnership. And then the city financing may include TIF and/or other city funds. Again, I think this needs to focus on more greenfield, or to not focus at all on greenfield type development, but rather more areas that are more difficult to develop, and keep it focused on that.
Any other comments, Kent?
I had just a couple of comments, and I just wanted to let you get through your stuff first. Under the downtown housing guidelines for the pilot, the new market rate apartments, it says if the market rate apartments include at least 10% housing deemed to be affordable, the city may approve 100% exemption up to 20 years. So in other words, if you have a token contribution to low income on a large complex, you'd get another 5 years. I don't know if that percentage has been vetted with anybody or if we're concerned about it. I know at the commission, it's constantly being talked about, can we add in low income and integrate it with our housing? But it's never really been quantified. So I just bring it up that it's a hard number in there at a 10%, and that feels like kind of a low bar to me, just
Yeah.
generally speaking. But
I mean, it may be a fairly low bar. One of the big problems is we really haven't done a housing study, and we haven't defined affordable housing. So I put it in there, but I think before we would actually implement it, we have to define, okay, what's affordable, and try to figure out what the needs are. So,
And then I had another question or comment with regard to tax increment financing policies. Years ago, we've incorporated delivery of tax increment financing using the note structure as opposed to issuing bonds and taking on that credit risk. I think that should be stated in the policy. If that's our practice and something we've been following, we should say the normal delivery method is the issuance of a developer note as opposed to bond financing. Because I think it creates confusion. Somebody comes in with that wants a TIF, and they're thinking it's a bond, and then we're gonna hand them a bunch of cash, as opposed to having all the development risk on them and making that note be paid out. So I just bring that up as a matter of practice. And then the other question is about extending the TIF beyond 15 years. You had a series of criteria by which that would trigger. Is that all consistent with the law, or did we just include that in there? Like public art, public spaces?
I'll let Eric Kenke wants to address that.
I stood up about the first comment you made about the primary method for the TIF being the TIF revenue note approach. My only comment about it is every time Jim and I talk about a project, it's any one of the three, you might say the three that are available. The first one being the tax exemption. We don't deal with that a lot. The Oak Manor Trailer Park remodel was a tax exemption. This answers the second question too, related to this. The 15 years is the maximum tax exemption you can grant under the TIF law in the urban renewal chapter. And that's where the 15 years comes from with respect to the revenue note as well. But if you're doing a urban renewal tax exempt financing project of any other type, other than the revenue note or the tax exemption, it can extend for, longer than even 25 years. But you have that law that took effect about 4 or 6 years ago that limits your window a little bit that way.
And I understand what you're saying, but the issue is if we're not in the practice of using that tool, the third tool you mentioned, to get them extended as long as 25 years, should you still leave the policy open?
But,
It should be, yeah.
yeah, I mean, we can firm up that, that description. I guess we can simply take that out. The other thing is, that might be, I think we're using a TIF note on the brownfields where it's developer requested. The public-private partnerships, that's where we're actually going out and borrowing money and doing that and going for longer than 15. So maybe we can make a better distinction between those two.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole here, but can we also accomplish the same thing with a backup special assessment through the developer's plan, the developer agreement to cover that? I know sometimes those didn't get signed, and that may be able to address some of that.
Yeah, that's, yeah, that would be the other one, is where you have an agreement with the developer and you're paying off their specials, and if their TIF doesn't come in, then they don't get their specials paid. So really, the city's at no risk, well, as much as specials are a risk.
Could we use something similar with the bond, though?
Yeah, and I think what John's mentioning is the credit risk we carry if we issue bonds,
Yeah.
and the ability to special assess any deficiency. And we've done this in other P3 agreements, and they have been signed and executed so that somebody's on the hook other than the city of Fargo.
Yeah. So that's sort of a third financing, or another financing mechanism where it's, it's the developers taking all the risk, but, the city's still doing the specials.
Jim, I think when Kent asked about the 10% that came from Strand that went to a National League Cities meeting, and there was a model put out there with 10% going into some of the housing complexes. I think when Jim's researched that in Minneapolis, that hasn't worked. There haven't been many developers that took it. And in fact, what happened in Minneapolis is they built all around Minneapolis, not in Minneapolis, because they didn't like that 10%. So I think when Jim and I came to that number, is that's following that model, but concern about how many developers will take it. Because we usually do either a low-income model that we're pursuing, we don't necessarily do a mixed development. And I think the other issue is affordability when we get into that question. And, some of us are living 10 to 15 years ago where rents were $500 a month, and that's not where they sit. I think Dave can attest his son got an apartment and it was well over $1,000. So we're in a different mindset now. And I talked to some young people and they got an apartment for $800 and they call that great. So it's hard, and I think we're to do affordability study or low income or housing study that might figure that out. But I think it's hard to tie it to development if it's not going to develop. If no developer is going to take the hook, why does it have value?
I think, we really need to do that housing study, and I think what we'll find is that, in Minneapolis, where they're having this requirement, they're trying to create apartments that are going to cost what they call affordable, that's $1,000 a month. Well, for $1,000 a month in Fargo, you can find a lot of apartments, and so I don't want to be, sort of have this solution in search of a problem, because, trying to create apartments that are available for $800-900 a month is not our problem in Fargo. That's why we need to do this study and try to understand better where there's gaps in housing needs.
And then when you look into that, there's apartments down in Maine available, cables in there, garages in there. A lot of things are in the price of the rent. So it's not really fair to say that's the rent because it's got other things wrapped into it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we get confused a little bit if you don't have all those other costs. Well, geez, it's not rent plus cable, plus parking, plus whatever. It's all in one inclusive fee. So it would be good to have a study.
Very good. Thanks, Jim. So what do we have next? Or are we ready to move on?
We're ready to move on.
So the next item on the agenda is number 3, application for a pilot for Beyond Shelter. Go ahead, Jim.
This is an application for a senior housing project, relatively, low rents, be located as part of the Kmart redevelopment. There's also a tax increment financing district that we're working on there. That's not being addressed today. The low-income housing tax credit applications are due at the end of September. And so these 2 applications are scheduled to go to City Commission on September 20th. If they don't have city support, they're just not going to be competitive and probably won't receive the money, and they really need these property tax exemptions. The Beyond Shelter application, it looks like it really would be done in 2 phases. I'll let Dan address that, but I believe he anticipates getting tax credits, this year for the first 40 units, and probably the follow-up year for the next 40 units would be built in 2 phases. The overall site would have commercial out towards University, and this housing would be backed by the former Kmart building. The zoning is still pending, so that any approval here would be contingent on the final zoning approval. I believe that doesn't go to planning commission until October, and then would come to city commission later. But we got this September deadline for knowing whether or not there's going to be property tax support for this application and the next one. And I'll just have Dan get up and talk about the project. Didn't bring any good pictures. I should have asked you for that, but I apologize for that.
Thanks, Jim, and Commissioner Pepcorn and members of the committee. I appreciate your time today in consideration of our pilot request. Just for the record, my name is Dan Madler, the CEO of Beyond Shelter Incorporated. We're basically a Fargo-based nonprofit developer of affordable housing. Been working here in Fargo for 22 plus years. I also did provide, as part of it, I don't have any photos, that we're still working on it with the architect, but I did provide an additional handout that wasn't in the packet, and I believe most of you were able to pick it up or have it. And I'll touch base on that here in a few minutes. So to kind of just talk a little bit of information about the project, we're working with Enclave Development to essentially redevelop the Kmart site just on South University Drive. And like Jim basically described, basically the site itself is approximately 10.8 acres. We'd be looking at carving out approximately 4 acres that would be rezoned for multifamily use. And currently we have neighborhood meetings planned for this Thursday to keep that process moving forward. And basically, and we'd be on the western edge of that. We wouldn't front the university. It'd be on the far west edge is where we put our project together. And what was included in your packet was a current site plan that kind of shows that long, narrow layout in the two buildings, the two phases. Phase 1, 46 units. Phase 2, another 46 units. In total, 96 or 92 units would be part of that development. And we would phase it, phase 1, phase 2, based off of the amount of financing that we can access through North Dakota Housing Finance Agency. But essentially, when it's all said and done, the buildings would be connected, and it would look like one long building, one community with a plaza in the back, etc. Regarding the location, it's really desirable for a number of different reasons. The healthcare, you go on the other side, I-94, the healthcare on University Drive. Working with Enclave, there's a potential grocer that will go on that site. Also, basically, we have a current bus stop on that site, Kmart site on 25th Avenue South, and then other access to I-94 and other services such as banking. The need for affordable housing, that'll probably also tie into this future market demand study related to affordability. But essentially, Beyond Shelter has right now to date 286 affordable senior homes here in the community of Fargo. And also by the end of this week, we'll add another 39. Our Homefield 3 project, which was a 3-phase project as well, will be complete. We'll have our placed in service date. And we'll be adding 39 units, so we'll have then 325 units serving the community of Fargo. Essentially, vacancy rates with that, going back to the need, right now in 2020, the vacancy rate for our senior units was 2.21%. Right now, year to date in 2021, it's tracking at 1.75, essentially turnover. Regarding the lease up of our new project, 39 units, over 17 units are already pre-leased, and we'll have it fully leased with less than 2 months. So the demand out there is there. We're seeing it. We've seen it for several years, and it just continues. The project itself, just some information, 2 buildings, like I said, it'll be 4-story buildings, 46 units each. Of the 46 units, 39 will be 1-bedrooms and 8 will be 2 bedrooms. And in total, each phase will have 10 fully accessible units. We'll also provide community space. Community is really important in affordable senior housing projects, sense of community. So we'll have a community room, a craft recreation room, fitness room, library, computer lab, and basically outdoor patio area. Related to parking, et cetera, there'll be detached garages. Who we serve, essentially, we serve households earning 60% of the area median income or less, and it'll be a 62 plus building, so 62 and older. We're also going to incorporate some tenant support. for the extremely low-income household. We'll have basically a total of 20 designated for extremely low income. And even though there's only going to be 10 or 20 of total, our track record, 30% AMI is considered extremely low income. 69% of our 286 or 193 units serve extremely low income seniors. And so we're digging deep and hitting those households that basically really do have that need. Additional information about the project, funding applications, like I said, will be this fall and possibly, if all goes well, follow up again next year for the phase 2. The beneficiaries, kind of circle back to this. This helps give a little color of who we serve. You can kind of look at the makeup and the gray hair there, but essentially our average age of our tenants there in our senior units is 72. Like I said, approximately 69% are extremely low income, or 193 households. Average tenant income, $17,500 a year, or about, if you wanted to put it into a job category, $8.41 an hour. The tenants, on average, contribute about 29% of their income for rent and utilities, and essentially that equates to about $423 per month in rent paid. With that, I would like to thank you for your time and would stand for any questions that you may have.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
John.
Dan, the state incentives are competitive.
Very much so. So we're going to be applying for a number of different financing sources. The main one will be the low-income housing tax credit, and as Jim mentioned, it's oversubscribed. I would say it's a 50-50 chance. And so it's very competitive, and that kind of goes back to what the state looks for in that allocation plan that I handed up or showed earlier, is the community behind the project, and do they have some skin in the game? And having a pilot really basically shows we have the need, and we're basically ready to support this project, and it's points. You get points for that, and very critical.
So, Mr. Chairman, just comment that without this pilot for the program, we're likely not to succeed with the state incentives, right? So,
Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, John, was that a motion?
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion. Do we have any other comments or questions? Otherwise, a second.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Anything else? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Pose same sign. Motion carries. Thanks, Dan. Thanks
Thank
for all
you.
you do. And whatever we can do to help with the state, please let us know. And Jim's kind of the contact man, so whatever we can do, we'd love to help you.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the support. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Jim, we'll read the next one. Sorry about that. Application for pilot for Prairie Ridge 4 LLP. Jim.
This is another senior project. This one, they're applying for these 4% low-income housing tax credits. They're much less competitive, so that they really haven't been used that much. They're not as valuable, which makes it difficult to get into the very, very low-income housing units. However, it'd still be an important need for our community to have some below-market senior housing available. The site's located north of 13th Avenue and east of I-29, kind of south of where the Cass County Jail is. The proposal is for 120 low-income housing units for seniors. Yeah, I think this one has a better chance of getting the credits, but it's still essential to their financial model that they qualify for these low-income housing tax credits. The low-income housing developer is based in Montana. They're doing this in partnership with Community Works, a low-income housing organization based in Bismarck that does projects. I think this is the first time they've been into the eastern part of North Dakota. So this application, I'll get the developer up here in a minute. The actually 17-year property tax exemption. This would allow them to get through this first phase of their affordability period. At the end of that, like probably 17 years, the property would be, this is more of a for-profit, private developer. They would exit the project and the ownership would become 100% with Community Works in Bismarck, a low-income housing developer. They would then be eligible for a different type of property tax exemption so that the rents would stay affordable for a full 30-year period. So the first kind of 15 years by this first developer, and then the second 15 years by the Bismarck-based developer, who would then likely keep them for the long term as lower income housing. If we can go online here, we can get the technology to work. Don, do you want to talk about the project? Tell us a little bit more about it, and I'll let you go ahead and then answer we can get any questions that people might have for you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jim. This is Don Sturhan, and I'm here in our Billings office with my associate, Peter Jones. So thank you for your time and attention to talk about our project. I could start with some history here, I guess. Our company was first formed in 2003. In fact, we were a collaborative effort and product of a joint venture between the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency and its counterpart in Montana and Wyoming. So those three state agencies actually came together to form Mountain Plains Equity Group. So in the early beginnings, our purpose was to syndicate tax credits. So we had a great opportunity in the early days, and that continues to this day, to work with private institutional investors, primarily banks, that have an appetite for tax credits. So we've deployed that capital throughout this three-state region for the last 18 years. We're proud to say that we have 13 projects in North Dakota that we have helped to finance through low-income housing tax credits. 5 of those are seniors. You're familiar with the project. I can't really embellish or elaborate any more on the information and testimony given by Dan Madler. Beyond Shelter has been a very successful developer in this region for some time. So I think we're fortunate to have his input in talking about the program and how it works. We're very pleased to be teaming up with Community Works North Dakota. As Jim indicated, they have been in North Dakota for many years and just now moving into Fargo for the first time. So it's a joint venture that we take pride in, that we're working with the local nonprofit in North Dakota to bring this project forward. Really, the impetus behind the project is the need in Fargo for more senior housing. Dan Madler talked about that, and I will just underscore the true need in Fargo to address the lack of affordability for seniors. So this particular project, as Jim Gilmore pointed out, is 120 units. And it's a larger project than you'll see for most low-income housing tax credit projects. It's really designed and developed in a U shape. It's 3 stories. And we're very excited about the design of it. It's really designed to be an interactive community. It provides for socialization and for interactivity amongst the seniors. So it's not just an apartment building for seniors, but it's really a community. And it has the common space in there where they can join together for parties and activities, fitness room, crafts room, library, media room, things of that nature. So we're very proud of the facility and what it will do for basically, developing a camaraderie amongst the seniors there in the building. It is a 4% tax credit project. That means we don't have to compete for the tax credits. As Dan Madler indicated, probably your odds in competing for the 9% tax credit are about 50-50 because there's only so many tax credits to go around. So with the 9%, it's very competitive, and about 50% of the project applications will actually be an award winner. If we go with the 4% tax credit, we don't get as much equity into the project, So what we try to do to overcome that is we look for areas that will provide us with a boost by locating in a qualified census tract, an area that will take advantage of some economic activity and basically supports and encourages that. So we get a 30% boost by being in a qualified census tract. Our location is in a qualified census tract, so that helps us with the economics. The other thing is just the size and the scale. It's part of why we're at 120 units, is then we can, because we're doing more size and scale, we can finance the project with a lower amount of equity. So it's still tight, but it's still, the numbers do work at that level. So we're targeting seniors that are 55 years of age and older. They're at 60% of the area median income or 50% of the area median income with the 120 units. It's a combination of 1 and 2 bedroom units. Has parking on the site, ample parking, and we have a underground parking as part of the design as well, which is a design feature that is unique. But the site itself really lends itself well to that particular site, so that we can get as much parking on the site as absolutely possible. It's about 3.1 acres, so we feel like we're utilizing every inch and every corner of that to its fullest advantage. So I guess maybe I'll just stop right there. Again, my name is Don Sturhan. I'm the president of Mountain Plains Equity Group. Our partner is Community Works North Dakota. And we're open for any questions and appreciate your support.
Do we have any questions? And I guess, like you said earlier, this is your first project in Fargo. And so, and maybe could you talk a little bit, do you have any others in North Dakota at this point?
Yes, we do. This is our first project in Fargo. Although when we first started, we did syndicate a project in West Fargo. So we do have Serenity Apartments in West Fargo that is an 18-unit senior project that we did early on in our career. But this is the first time we've been back in Fargo with a project of this scale. Again, we have about 13 projects that we've syndicated in Fargo. We're not a developer on all of those, as we would be in this case, but several we have. We just completed one in Bismarck, Century Cottages, which is a 40-unit senior housing, and it sits right next to our other sister property, which is Sierra Court, also in Bismarck, and that's another 40-unit senior housing. So those are our most recent ones that we've done in senior housing in the state of North Dakota.
And I guess, if you don't mind, just a couple of quick comments about the location. There are grocery stores and other amenities fairly close to this location. And I guess my question is public transportation. Do you have perspective on that? Do you have a future stop there, or is there one in that vicinity?
Yeah, fortunately, there is one in the vicinity. Right at the corner of this location is the bus stop. So we're very fortunate to have that. And you're correct. We're in close proximity to a number of services that are in that general area. So having the bus stop right there at the corner is definitely a plus.
Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, we will accept a motion.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much. We appreciate your presentation, and also we appreciate you locating this in Fargo. I think hopefully it's a beginning of a beautiful relationship where we have a little friendly competition with Dan. I think that's a good thing.
Well, thank you very much. We've been we've found the support in Fargo to be phenomenal, so we appreciate that very much, and we'll keep you posted on the progress.
Thank you very much. Jim, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think we'll also add, they'd requested a letter of support, and so I think I'll put that on the city commission agenda along with the pilot request. I think that may help their application.
Thank you, everybody. That's the end of our items on the agenda, so have a good afternoon. We are adjourned.